shut this back door.
So we're live now?
Is it too early for a question? I put in the 4-inch spacers, so so they're not butted up against the end, but these ones are pretty long and they're protruding from the form.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, you're supposed to put blocks in the other end too and clamp the flat ends together. You know what I mean?
Okay, those we can use the 5-inch boards.
Yeah. So you create pressure with clamps back there. I had completely forgotten about that.
No,
yeah.
we're good on time, sir.
Okay, good. So we're live. Okay, once again, surprise live. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Ask Brian Boggs. We've been dealing with some technical issues that we've had in our first couple of episodes and bought some new toys. Hopefully that will help. New mic, new recorder, and we've got some issues squared away with our own internet access. So hopefully this will go a little bit more smoothly. So we had some great response, some really good questions, and hopefully you guys will stay tuned. If you want to ask questions, you want to go to askbrianboggs.com, and you can also find past episodes there. And Kevin, we can get on the YouTube as well, right?
On the YouTube and even on Instagram.
Okay.
And Facebook.
Okay, so yeah, stick with us. There's a number of ways to check in.
They can listen to them on iTunes.
Yeah.
iTunes as well. Okay, great. So, so I say we've had several questions come in that have been kind of interesting, and of course, any question asked about what's going on here or thoughts can evoke a whole lot of responses and a whole lot of words from me. So, but I'll try to make it brief enough to include several questions in this episode. So we got a question from Mitch Mitchell with a little bit of background. He asks, have you ever seen Tin Cup? Yes, I have. There's a scene in there where Kevin Costner as a character is annoyed and breaks every one of his golf clubs except the beloved 7-iron. Do you have a tool you have a similar relationship with? And I don't know if you're meaning the beloved 7-iron or the ones I've all busted up. I have both. I have tools I've destroyed, and I think all the ones that are left are my 7-iron, and I've got quite a few of them. I think that, when I thought about this question, because this one came in earlier, it really reminded me of the importance of the relationship I have with every tool that I use. And that relationship is one where if I'm paying attention to it, if I'm listening to it, it gives me all the information I need back about how to tune it up, how to sharpen it, what it's used for, where it's good and where it's not good. Whether it's a spoke shave, a bandsaw, a chainsaw, it doesn't really matter. Every tool that you use is, the way I look at it, is looking for someone to have a relationship with. It wants to be used certain ways. And being a self-taught craftsman, I've trained myself to listen to that. That has been my teacher in a sense. So the relationship to my tools is in a lot of ways similar to one's relationship to any good teacher. There's hardly a better teacher than the tool that you have in your hand, and it deserves a lot of respect. And if it's not performing well, there's probably something you can do about it other than smashing it up. So those relationships are really important. Gary Wallander asked, A2 stool and PMV11 are relatively new steels on the market. Do you have a preference for alloys, or would you rather stick with the traditional O1 steels? I've done a lot of experimenting with steels, and particularly when I was first starting to make spoke shaves for sale, and this was back in, I think, the late 80s, early 90s. I experimented with irons of custom-made irons of S5, A2, A11, W2, M4, I think it was T11, and in different heat treating processes of some of those. And the differences, and of course O1, The differences were significant in some ways, mostly in how easy they sharpened or how well they responded to the stones I was using at the time, which were water stones for some things, but mostly even then I was using diamond compound. And I think that there are very specific applications for each of these different types of steel. The ones that are most popular now, the alloys most popular, are the A2 and PMV11. And PMV11 is a proprietary metal that, as far as I know, only Lee Valley Tools Veritas has offered through their planes, and possibly some other tools. I only know of their planes using that. I haven't used it personally. I've heard only great things about it. I have used A2 steel a lot, and while it has been demonstrated to last or to hold an edge about 6 times longer than 01 in woodworking applications, it's much more difficult to sharpen than 01. And I think that if you're not using diamond, I don't think you're going to get a great edge with any of the alloys. 01 is friendlier to pretty much any sharpening process. It holds an edge well enough that I wouldn't bother with any of the alloys unless you're in production, you're using a hand plane for hours on end, and you have the patience to develop the skills to sharpen it. If you are used to using 01 and then you start using any kind of alloy, and you sharpen that alloy the same way you sharpen your 01 steel, you're probably not going to get great results. I've had to develop specific techniques for removing the burr, which is the biggest challenge when you go from 01, which is a relatively brittle steel at its favorite hardness, which is around 62 Rockwell. Well, maybe 60, 62, somewhere in there, but at that hardness, it's a relatively brittle steel, which means that when you're sharpening it, the edge breaks off or is removed rather than simply folding over. Whereas the tougher alloy steels, even at those hardnesses, don't shear as well on the stone, and they tend to form a tougher burr, a more flexible burr, which is a lot trickier to get rid of. And the standard techniques for sharpening 01 steel often don't get rid of that burr. So it will seem like a problem of the metal, but I think it is a problem more of the metal not being adapted to, or a sharpening process not being adapted appropriately to the metal. There's just so many variables that will impact whether or not one steel or the other is appropriate, but 01 is a simpler steel to work with, and most people find it a favorite. Certainly over A2. I cannot speak to PMB11. I look forward to trying one of those steels sometimes, one of those blades. So thanks, Gary, for that question. John Yother asks, what's your favorite bandsaw blade? We have 3 bandsaws in the shop, and when I started out, I had a 14-inch, actually I started out with a 14-inch Central Machinery bandsaw from Harbor Freight, which was probably has found its place in the recycling bin by now, but I upgraded to a Delta 14-inch and started experimenting with different blades then, and really got to like the wood slicers. The Timberwolf, Highland Hardware sells them. It's a really good blade for resawing with a saw that size. In fact, I don't know if there's a better blade for saws of that size and power. And the reason I say size and power, larger saws that run with more horsepower and higher speeds, you won't get the benefit from that blade. I've found I don't get a benefit until I go up to a carbide. My 30-inch bandsaw performs beautifully with a Resaw King. These are the Laguna blades. They're expensive, but you'll get performance from the saw that you never got before. But it's a waste of money if you haven't tuned your saw up. So the first thing to do is make sure the tool is tuned as well as it can be, so that the feedback you're getting about the cutting quality from the blade is feedback that's just from the blade, not from a saw issue. But with the 30-inch, I find that a Resaw King is the best resawing blade for that. And then from a 36-inch, which runs about 100 miles an hour at the blade and has 15 horses behind it. The Woodmaster CT from Lennox is my favorite there by far in terms of feed rate, quality of cut. If you're cutting curves, Lennox makes some great blades. I use a Morse blade. Its curves are not quite as critical. I like a skip tooth blade. We use almost exclusively now 1/2-inch 4 skip blades on the 30-inch 8s American, and that's because of what specifically we're doing on that saw. We're only cutting gentle curves of about 5 or 6 inches radius at the tightest. Mostly we cut much more gentle curves and straight lines with that, and we don't generally cut real thick stock with that saw, so we don't need a coarser tooth. If we're cutting real thick stock and resawing, we'll go to the big 36-inch saw. If we're cutting tighter radiuses, we'll go to the 14-inch saw. So we're using different blades for each saw based on what we're using the saw for and what the saw is. So the bandsaw blade selection is specific to all of the variables. A 1/2-inch 4 skip is probably the most versatile blade that I use, and it's quite possible with a well-tuned saw to get a glue joint quality cut from that. I have cut tenons on my saw with that, and it's possible to get tolerances of 1/1000th of an inch and surfaces that need no further refinement before being glued. So, and that blade is not an expensive one, either from Lennox or from Morse wood tool. So we've experimented with a whole lot of blades, and the most important thing is not the blade, but everything else about the saw. With a well-tuned saw, guides that are tuned up well, you'll get the best performance from whatever blade is on there, and that's going to be your key. Drew Creswell asks, what is your favorite bench plane? Lee Valley, Lie-Nielson? Well, actually, my favorite bench plane is one from Conrad Sauer's, a Sauer-Steiner plane. It's a little smoothing plane, which is a dream to use. If you can possibly afford to get one of his planes, they're absolutely delightful. Years ago, I was asked to demonstrate at a woodworking show and talk about the differences, or using Lie-Nielson and Veritas or Lee Valley tools, and they're both really fine tools. I have a lot of respect for both companies, and they do a lot to ensure really good quality for both of their planes. The difference primarily, I think, is Lee Valley has done a lot more innovative things to their planes that are aimed at making it more friendly to the user. I don't find that any of those innovations have yet really made the plane cut wood better. They've made the plane perform differently for the user interface with the tool itself, not the tool's interface with the wood. And that's a big distinction for me. It's primarily important that the tool cuts wood well, and all of those planes do that. I like Lie-Nielson's, and they're the ones that I use more. I like the way they look, I like the way they feel, and they perform well. But to be honest, I have issues with every plane that I've used except Conrad's, of course. Lie-Nielson also makes a fabulous plane if you have a chance to get a look at DAED tools, D-A-E-D tools. But Lee Valley and Lie-Nielson, there's usually a difference in price. Lee Valley being less expensive, Lie-Nielson being a little bit more. I don't think you're going to be disappointed with either one of them, but the Lie-Nielsons seem to perform a little bit more like the way that I work, and so that's what's on my bench. Andy Clark asks, I'm thinking of purchasing a set of sharpening stones. Do you recommend diamond stones or water stones? Now, this is an age-old question that will never stop being asked, and it's probably good that it isn't, because as our tool metallurgy evolves, our stones will need to evolve. And when I first started learning about Japanese tools, for example, the really best Japanese chisels were recommended to be sharpened on a certain water stone from a certain mountain, because that specific steel responded best with that specific grit. And we don't really talk about that much in our sharpening lore now. We're starting to use alloys, and most people will still sharpen them either on sandpaper or on a water stone. And I don't think you're going to get a great cut from a water stone on alloys. It just doesn't seem to cut the metal uniformly like diamond does. Unfortunately, the diamond stones that are available, in my perspective, are not great quality tools. I use them. I happen to have gotten a good deal on some, and we use them for our initial shaping. And then we go to a diamond paste on a lapping plate, which is a cast iron plate designed specifically for lapping with diamond compound. The cast iron has a specific hardness and porosity that works well. The diamond particles will embed themselves in the pores, hold still, and allow you to get a really nice cut. That's the best edge, or the best stone for getting really fine edges on alloys. And I think for 01 as well, but I don't think diamond beats Waterstone for 01 steels. Certainly for alloys, which are most of our blades are alloys. So if you're going to use a diamond stone, I strongly recommend getting some diamond abrasive, which I believe Woodcraft carries now. Beta Diamond in California carries it. There are a number of suppliers of diamond compound. It's a paste, and you can get different grits. I generally finish with 4 micron, and then I've got a flattened maple block that I use the 4 micron diamond compound on, and that gives me my final polish. One of the things I don't like about water stones is the creation of mud. And while that is often pitched as an advantage, you create a scenario where you're getting not just a clean cutting environment, but it's an erosion-like environment where the mud being above the plane of the stone and not fixed to the stone erodes the edge and rounds it over slightly, so you can't get a true flat all the way to the edge. And the same is true actually with diamond compound on a lapping plate, but it's a smaller particle. The lapping plate is hard, and it's less of an issue getting that roundedness at the edge than I have found with water stones. So for that reason, we use almost exclusively diamond stones here. The rounding over issue and the hardness issue and the ability to cut alloys as well as 01. But the argument will never go on, will never stop going on, and there's always somebody coming out with a new sharpening system or a theoretically better diamond stone. So I don't think the conversation should end. Try out new stuff. Different people have different responses to these stones. I think some of them, I think the water stone takes more skill to use really well to maintain its flatness than the diamonds do, and that's a whole different story. Some people love developing that skill, and hats off to them. So we've got one more question that's come in. Harrison Flynn, I'm just starting out. How important is it to use a moisture meter? Well, if you're making spoons, it's not all that important. But if you're making furniture where you're gluing things together or using joinery where parts are bonded or fixed together, moisture content is as important as precision and selection of material. In order to get any joinery to work well, you have to have a precision of the two mating surfaces that are being bonded with glue have to be precisely cut. The adhesive has to be properly applied. Clamping pressure has to be appropriate. And if the moisture content is too high, that alone can cause failure when everything else is done beautifully. So there's nothing more important than understanding the moisture content of what you're working with. So, I worked, I don't know how many years before, probably 6 years or so as a greenwood chair maker, a ladder back chair maker, before owning a moisture meter. And those chairs are still holding up. They're not, the joints are not as tight as I would like. I think it's more important that you somehow have a way of detecting moisture content. There's a number of ways you can do that. John Alexander, in his book, Make a Chair from a Tree, talked about tapping the woods together to listen to them. Well, that's only good if you've been working wood long enough to know what dry hickory in 3/4 inch rounds is supposed to sound like. But the growth rate and the dimension of the part is going to impact sound too. So that was a tricky one, but that was what I started out using. Now that we're using a moisture meter, I use it all day. I have my employees sharing it, and it's in use many times every single day, because moisture changes, or wood changes moisture content throughout a day. We've got several different projects going on at once, and we need to know that at glue up time, or at the time that we're cutting the joinery, that we've got the parts at the appropriate moisture content, which is generally 7 to 8%. When you're using a moisture meter, though, you still have to pay attention to all of the other signals that a traditional woodworker not using a moisture meter would have to pay attention to. Does the wood feel moist? If it's been drying and it's getting drier and drier and drier, and you're reading the surface with a moisture meter, you're going to get a lower reading than what's in the core. If the wood's been drying for 10 years, you're probably going to get a relatively accurate metering from the surface, but you've got to cut the wood open and read the core, whether it's a pinless or a pen type. And this is especially tricky with walnut. We've had a lot of issues trying to get walnut dry enough, and until we open the wood up, we don't know, meter or no, we don't know if it's properly dried or dried far enough. So yes, moisture meter is very important, but it's just like anything else. It's user attention that assures that you know your moisture content, not just an electronic tool.
Question from Michael Anthony Johnson on what you're talking about right now is what meter do you use?
I use a Wagner. It's probably 10 years old. It's one of the little pinless Wagners. I think they're like $150 now. It was $130 when I bought it. I don't use a pen type because too many times when I'm checking the moisture content, I'm checking a piece of wood that I can't put pinprick holes in. I need that surface. So if I need to read deeper into the surface, I'll keep a part of that wood attached to the board that I'm needing to dry, that can be sacrificed and cut open. Or as I'm machining the wood, I'll check periodically to make sure as I expose a new face that new face is reading consistent with the surface reading. And you know, it's one of the cheaper moisture meters, but I've compared it to others that friends are using, and it seems to be every bit as sensitive and accurate as the more expensive ones.
All right, we got another question from Clayson Woodworks, and it is, what's your favorite table saw blade and why?
What's my favorite table saw blade? This is a tricky one because I bought my first table saw 2 years ago. So I really haven't gotten that far into exploring blades. I used to think a lot of Forest City tools, but the last blade I had from them was not performing well at all, and the company didn't really help me out with that. Tenryu seems to be performing the best of all that we've tried. We've tried Freud and some other low-end blades from Home Depot and Lowe's. And we've tried some others, but hands down of the ones we've tried, Tenryu is the best. It seems to be a perfect blade. But I don't think any blade is a do-all. You need a crosscut blade for miters and crosscuts, and you need a rip blade for rips. And you know, like any other thing that has a blade on it, you've got to tune the rest of the tool up, not just the blade. And I really haven't done that with our saw. I bought a SawStop, the industrial version of SawStop's machine, and it's pretty good, but I think it could use some tuning up, and we just haven't ripped it apart to rebuild it and tune it up like I think it needs to be done. But we get pretty good results from Tenryu. I will say though, we have not yet gotten the level of precision from our table saw that we get from our bandsaws, and that's kind of a backward story from most shops. But I'm saying that because my bandsaws have gotten a lot of my attention, and I've spent a lot of time tuning them up. I have not done that with the table saw, so the results I'm getting from the blade are not solid. Okay, well that's.
First question about was the grain chair wood. Grain wood chair is Robert Karen.
Oh, right. I just skipped right over Levon's question. What's the name of the wood supplier you work with? Mentioned in the green wood video. We've changed suppliers recently. We actually buy logs directly from a log broker that sells internationally, and we have our wood custom sawn. Billy Rice in Madison County has been doing our sawing lately. Robert Karen has done some other sawing for us. But we've also decided to start supplying wood to other chair makers, because I know that as a chair maker, you can't just go to any supplier and get your material. It's got to be selected ideally as a log and sawn into material the way that a chair maker wants it sawn. And because that's hard to get, we keep a lot of it on supply, and we keep enough that we can share the goods. So let us know if you need help with that. So that wraps today up. I look forward to seeing you again next week. Next is it 2 weeks from now?
2 weeks from now.
2 weeks from now we'll do this again. So stay tuned to AskBrianBoggs.com if you want to check it in later or look at past episodes. We'll be right there, and be sure to send in questions as well. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks so much.